Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. I've been wanting to film this video for so long, and an old friend of mine actually is having a baby girl, and we were talking a bit and she was asking about breastfeeding, and it just kind of reminded me that I really wanted to get this video filmed. I have not been breastfeeding for almost a year now, so I'm gonna do my best to remember all the details to share with you, just kind of my tips and tricks and what I learned along the way, also my journey, how breastfeeding went for us, why we stopped when we did. And this video isn't just for you. I actually want this to look back on when I have my second kid, because everybody's breastfeeding journey is different, and I think the more you know going into breastfeeding, the better. I really encourage you guys to do your research, listen to other people's stories, other people's advice, and it's not all gonna apply to you, but it's worth hearing. Definitely went into breastfeeding not knowing much. We touched on it in my prenatal class, but I was kind of naive and I thought breastfeeding is the most natural thing in the world, so it should be easy. Well, it's not. This isn't to discourage anybody from choosing to breastfeed. I just think that the more you know, the better prepared you are to overcome any obstacles you may encounter, and thus it will extend how long you can breastfeed for, because the trials and errors and all the crap you have to go through sometimes can put a lot of weight and anxiety and stress on your shoulders, and it doesn't make breastfeeding fun. And then that special connection that you have with your kid, it kind of gets ruined. And I would say that's kind of what happened to me. We had a really stressful start to breastfeeding, and so if we hadn't had that kind of start, I think I probably could have gone longer. But at the same time, you also need to think about what's best for not only your child, but what's best for you and your mental state. So if you guys are really struggling with breastfeeding, don't push yourself and put all that anxiety and stress on yourself to do it. There's nothing wrong with formula feeding. There's nothing wrong with doing both. I believe everyone is just doing what is best for them and what's best for their baby, and whatever works for you is the best for you. So first I want to start off with my journey. I had an emergency C-section a couple days before my due date, and if you guys want to hear that story, I will put it in an iCard and I will link it down below, but I talk about my whole birth story. It was pretty scary, and I've heard people say that if you get an epidural or if you have to have a C-section, it's going to affect breastfeeding because you're drugging your baby, and so it's harder for them to do. I truly don't believe that, and the first time we breastfed, I didn't really have an issue. I would say I was really drugged up because this is an emergency. They tried to put me under, so I had a lot of drugs in my system. So I didn't breastfeed as early as I originally wanted to. So I would say have an advocate, like your partner, your husband, whatever, to just make sure to remind you after you give birth that getting that initial breastfeeding session in is a priority for you. And because I totally forgot about it. I was recovering and kind of out of it, and I didn't even get to hold like Jace for, it felt like forever. I don't honestly know how long it was. But eventually the nurse was like, hey, like, do you want to try breastfeeding? And I was like, duh. I was like, yes, let's do it. And it went totally fine. I, again, was a little drugged up, so I don't remember all the details. I know it was a little bit uncomfortable and awkward, especially because I had just had major surgery. But one tip I would say is to learn different breastfeeding holds. I felt like when I was in the hospital, I was forced into doing a certain hold, and it was so uncomfortable for me and my body. And it took it took weeks before I finally found a position that was comfortable for me and that allowed Jace to latch properly. So go into birth knowing different holds, practice with like a doll. I would say if you have a breastfeeding class in your area, it would be a really good idea to take. I don't think you can be over prepared for breastfeeding. So while that first feed went really well, everything went downhill from there. We really struggled to get him to latch. It was quite painful and I really couldn't move. And that's the tough thing with having a C-section, is you're in so much pain and you have like no abdominal muscles, and I think that definitely makes breastfeeding harder, because it's hard enough just to even hold your baby, never mind try and figure out positions and trying to get him to latch. And I mean, I had to have people hand me Jace so I could feed him, so he wasn't latching. It was hard, it was painful. And so I saw 2 lactation consultants at the hospital and I was not impressed. It took a day. Like, I tried to get a lactation consultant in right away as soon as we had trouble the second time we breastfed, and they didn't get to me until the next day. So that night was awful. Jace was crying all night and I couldn't even get out of bed to grab him, and the nurse ended up taking him away so I could get a little bit of sleep, but he was so hungry, so he was so upset, and my milk wasn't coming in, like there's barely any colostrum, which is your initial milk. And that first night was so hard because I could not make him happy and I could not feed him. When I did see the lactation consultant, she came in, helped me with my hold, got him latched, and then left and never came back. She was like, I'll be back, and she never came back. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I don't know if he's getting any. I was just so confused and I felt so alone. And then I had a male nurse who was also like an intern or a trainee or whatever they call them, and he had no idea anything about breastfeeding, so he was no help to me, and it was extremely stressful. Eventually the doctors were like, we can't release you from the hospital until he's eating properly. We suggest continuing trying to breastfeed, but we're gonna supplement him with some formula too. And at that point I was like, well, yeah, I just want my baby to be fed and happy. So I had no problem giving him formula. I don't think anything's wrong. There's anything wrong with formula. You gotta feed your baby. That's the most important thing. So we were feeding him and they introduced me to pumping. So I was using the hospital grade pump and I would feed him, then I would supplement with formula, and then I would pump. And that's a lot. When your baby wants to eat every couple hours, that is a ton of work. I did that honestly for like the first month of Jace's life. Yeah, I breastfed, then I supplemented him with formula, and then I pumped. And then even at one point, I would feed him whatever I pumped too. So your baby's eating like every 3 hours, and each feed is taking like 2 hours. Like, that's not even a joke. So I was exhausted. It was so hard. I did have a bit of issues like raw nipples. It's very common, happens all the time to everybody. My doctor just prescribed me an ointment to put on, and I think it was honestly maybe like 2 weeks in, and my nipples were totally fine and they got used to it. So if you're having like dry, cracked nipples, just know that that's really completely normal. Did eventually get released from the hospital, and they encouraged me to see a lactation consultant outside of the hospital just to keep working on it, making sure he was gaining weight. So my maternity clinic that was taking care of me throughout my pregnancy, just next door they had an awesome lactation consultant office, and so I saw them for the first month of Jace's life. I was seeing them every couple days, and then I was seeing them twice a week, and then I was seeing them once a week. Even after the first month, I think I was still seeing them once a week. And because Jace was not gaining weight, my milk took forever to come in, and so Jace was just not getting enough. That's, you know, weird. I was breastfeeding for a long time, and so they were like, no, continue supplementing with formula. One thing to tell you is be prepared that breastfeeding might not work out completely right away. I came home from the hospital and I did not have bottles. I did not have a pump. I just came home expecting that we would just be breastfeeding, and that's all I needed. So get a bottle. Even if it's just one bottle, get a bottle. I think pumping is great so that you can have a little bit of freedom. People I talk to, like some moms would pump just so that the dad could do the night feedings every now and then. So I think if you're planning to exclusively breastfeed, I think investing in a pump is worth it. That's just my opinion, but again, pumps are expensive. So maybe you want to organize to have a pump rented when you get home from the hospital. Here in Canada, you can rent them from like Shoppers Drug Mart, which we did rent, and then we eventually bought a small one. But the thing with, I packed so much stuff away, so I wish I could show you my pump, but I had the Medela. I bought the Medela and it was just a single one. What I liked about it was that it was just small. It was like this big, but what I didn't like is that it was only on one side. So it took a lot longer. I had to alternate, right? And I would have loved to just get both done at the same time and be done with it. Second is if you are pumping, I would invest in getting those hand-free bras that you can put your pump in, because oh my gosh, trying to take care of a newborn and pump is so hard. I seriously had the bassinet next to my bed and I would be pumping, and at this time I was using the double pump that we had rented, and I would be with my leg rocking the bassinet while pumping. It was awful. Seriously, so bad. So yeah, being able to pump hands-free is definitely something I would consider preparing for. We were also told the week after Jace was born that he had a tongue tie and a high palate. So the tongue tie is this little string right here. It's very tight, and if you guys didn't know, breastfeeding is really all about their tongue. you kind of think it's their mouth that's sucking, but it's really all with their tongue. So with tongue ties, makes it really difficult to breastfeed. And I didn't know that. And my lactation consultant that brought it up said, we'll watch it and maybe we'll clip it. Next time, I would absolutely, the moment I heard my baby has a tongue tie, I would clip it right away. Because at that 3-week appointment, we talked about it. I said, we talked about this tongue tie and like, we're still not getting anywhere. Can we clip it? Will this help? And my lactation consultant, because I had a few different ones, I never had like the same one. But this lactation consultant was like, yes, let's clip it. Like, I can't believe they didn't do that right away. They're like, I don't know why they waited. And I'm like, okay, do it. They did it right there at the lactation consultant's office, and some hospitals can also do it for you. If it's very evident, if the doctor notices that in the hospital, or the lactation consultant in the hospital notices that. So at 3 weeks, we clipped the tongue tie, and they do it right there. They take little scissors and they cut it, and I know it kind of sounds scary, but he barely bled, and I put him on the breast right away, and he breastfed like a champ. He didn't cry, nothing. So don't be scared of like them taking scissors to your kid's tongue. It's really not that bad. It's really not scary. And that was like the big game changer for us, is as soon as we clipped that tongue tie, he was amazing. Breastfeeding was so much easier. So I really, really encourage you that if you're told that your baby has a tongue tie, or there's actually lip ties too, which is like this one up here, get them clipped. It makes all the difference. Truly, truly, truly. It doesn't cost anything. So worth it. I think it was maybe a week and a half that we supplemented with formula. I would breastfeed, then I would give him formula, and I would pump. And after a week, we were okay to cut out formula, but so I was breastfeeding, then I was pumping, and then I was feeding him whenever I pumped. So those feeds, again, were taking like 2 hours. And I told my doctor, I said at 3 weeks, I was like, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot do these 2-hour-long feeds. It's driving me nuts. I'm not getting any sleep at night. And she said, okay, let's try stopping the pumping and see how it goes. And I'm like, all right. So I stopped pumping, and I was just breastfeeding him completely all on its own. He was a very lazy feeder, so like he was taking so long to feed that it was crazy. I had to, so some tips if you have a sleepy feeder is to have them naked, like just in a diaper. Skin on skin is really great, and yeah, if they're not like covered and bundled up in clothes, it kind of wakes them up a little bit more. They're a little bit more awake. I also was told to use a damp cloth and put it on the back of his neck if he was falling asleep while he was eating. So we did that kind of stuff, switching a lot. If he would start to fall asleep, then I would switch, and that would kind of wake him up again. So yeah, we had to do literally all that fun stuff. When we cut out pumping, I felt so much better. It still was hard, and I fed him whenever he seemed hungry. Like, I just fed on demand. I didn't do a strict schedule. I would say like in the first at least month or so, just feed on demand whenever. Like, you don't have to watch the clock. You don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. Just feed when you think that he needs to feed. But I mean, do make sure that he is feeding enough. After we got through that first month, breastfeeding was a lot easier, but I did feel very anxious still. He went to the doctor a lot just to make sure that his weight was going up, because it took Jace a month to get back to his birth weight, and normally babies are back to their birth weight within like a week or two. So that was like a bit of a concern, to make sure Jace was getting enough and he was growing fine. But I think just that initial hard month really set me up for a lot of anxiety when it came to feeding him. I forgot to also mention that I was taking some pills to get my supply going in the beginning. I was taking a prescribed pill to boost my milk supply, and the pill that I was prescribed was domperidone. And along with domperidone, I was taking blessed thistle and fenugreek. So I found that those pills worked really well to help with my supply. So if you are struggling with making enough milk, I would ask your doctor about what supplements you can take. And they don't harm the baby. Again, the fenugreek and the blessed thistle, they're natural ingredients, so they're really good for you, period. And then the domperidone, it was really necessary for me, so I didn't really have any reservations on it. So I decided to stop breastfeeding at 8 months. My original goal was to make it to a year. I kind of always knew I didn't want to breastfeed after like longer than a year, and that's just me personally. I don't think there's anything wrong with going longer, but because we had such a hard start, I honestly just felt exhausted with breastfeeding, and Jace was ready too. I obviously took that into account. He was a very distracted baby. So to breastfeed him, first of all, he never wanted to be under a cover, but the problem with him not being under a cover is that he wanted to constantly look around. He was a very curious baby, so he literally would attach and then he would pull off to look around, and then he would attach and pull off, and he would do that over and over again. And that's painful, guys. Like, when your baby is constantly pulling off, it's not fun. And so I started experiencing a lot of pain breastfeeding, which I hadn't really dealt with. Even in the beginning, when we were having such a hard time with him getting enough milk and the latch and stuff like that, I never had breast pain. And at this point, as he was getting older, I had so much pain. And sometimes we would be fine, like for a week, and then other weeks it was just awful. And I would just get so mad when Jace was constantly pulling off to look around. I'm like, Jace, can you just stay on? And like, you don't want that kind of frustration in regards to feeding your baby. Like, that's not good or healthy. So I felt like it was honestly affecting my relationship with my child, and I just decided that breastfeeding was just no longer the best choice for us. It started like in the middle of the day, I think. We would switch to a bottle for those feeds. Then I was only breastfeeding him in the morning and at night, and then the rest of his feeds were all bottle. And then I was only breastfeeding him at night. And I forgot to mention, but by 6 months we had cut out the night feed. Jace didn't need it anymore. I don't even know when we cut out the night feed. It might have even been at like 5 months, I think. So when I'm saying night feed, I mean like the evening before bed. So yeah, Jace took to the bottle absolutely fine. There was not even an issue, which really just solidifies that he was ready to stop breastfeeding. And I think it did really help our relationship. I didn't feel as stressed and stuff, but I will say that, like, after a few months of not breastfeeding and seeing other people still breastfeeding their kids, I definitely missed it, and I wish that I could have gone longer, but that's just how it went for us. So that's why I'm making this video, because I want the best for you and your baby. And if you can start off your breastfeeding journey on a better note and just kind of know what to look for, know what to expect, you will be able to go longer and be happier with it and not take on all that stress of breastfeeding. So I think I have touched on everything. If you guys have any other questions regarding breastfeeding, I'd be more than happy to answer them down in the comments below, so don't hesitate to ask. Thank you guys so much for watching. I wish you all the best in your breastfeeding journey, and please don't put too much pressure on yourself. Breastfeeding is the most natural thing in the world, but it's also the hardest thing in the world, and you just need to be prepared, and going in with a ton of information is the best way to ensure that you can have the best breastfeeding start for your journey. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you guys want to see more from me, and we will see you in the next one. Bye!